Hi there, I'm Joey Burger, Permaculture Director here at Heartwood Mountain Sanctuary. We're a wilderness retreat destination located in beautiful Humboldt County in Northern California. It's springtime here on our farm, and normally this time of year we'd be getting Heartwood ready to welcome guests and workshops. We'd be running permaculture design courses, natural building workshops, yoga retreats. But it's middle of April 2020. We're in the middle of this pandemic, this COVID pandemic that's the whole world's dealing with right now. So instead, we're focusing our efforts this year on really building up our food security. We've got 12 residents living on the property, and we're going to do all we can to grow our own food this year and make sure our pantries are full, because we don't know what's coming next. So in collaboration with our sister farm on the Big Island of Hawaii, Dragonheart Farm, we're going to be bringing you these short educational videos to help you jumpstart your garden, grow a little food in your backyard, maybe some stuff on your windowsill. So follow along with us and our sister farm across the Rainbow Bridge in Hawaii as we bring you this education. First thing I'm going to show you is our browns. These are our carbon materials. For this demonstration, we're going to use leaves. These are oak leaves. Other forms of carbon are cardboard, newspaper, straw. A lot of people just build their compost piles out of straw. Here's another source of carbon. These are a bunch of smaller branches and twigs. We're actually going to use this at the very bottom of our compost pile, just to give it some aeration at the bottom of the pile. Here are some sources of the greens. This is our nitrogen source. This is all wild grass that we mowed down this morning. It's all chopped down. This is just some kitchen scraps from my kitchen. We've got a biodegradable plastic bag in here. You're probably seeing some of these at your grocery store lately. We're going to throw that in the pile and see how well that breaks down. And then lastly over here, this is a pile of grass that we actually shredded about a week ago. So I want to talk to you quickly about shredding or chopping your materials ahead of time. When you chop and shred up your materials, you increase the surface area for your bacteria to go to work on. So this is a pile that we ran through our little chipper shredder. You can see it's breaking down very rapidly. This we just cut down with our weed whips this morning. If you're mowing your lawn, that's going to be pretty good to chop up your material really well. If you can also run over your leaf with the lawnmower a few times, that'll also just help break down the decomposition process a lot faster. So to make our compost, ideally you want a 30-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio. That's the ideal ratio of browns to greens to jumpstart that pile and get it up to the temperatures we want to see. So we have our leaves. Our leaves are 60-to-1. This is an oak leaf from the oak trees around here. They're 60-to-1 carbon to nitrogen. Our wild grass is a 20-to-1. Split those numbers. If we were to combine them at a 1-to-1 ratio, it would give you about a 40-to-1 ratio. A little too high in carbon. So we're going to actually add more of our nitrogen source to this pile while we're building it. We're going to be building this in layers, and that's an easy way to measure your pile as you build it. So we'll probably be building 4 inches of leaves and then 5 or 6 inches of the grass, the nitrogen source on top of that. So I want to talk to you next about enclosures for your compost. We're not going to actually build an enclosure for our compost. We're just going to build a pile right on the ground today. But some of the reasons why you might want an enclosure, the main one is to keep animals out. A lot of times you're going to be throwing your kitchen scraps in there, and it can attract your dog or other neighborhood animals. You want to keep those animals from getting sick. So we're not worried about animals getting in our garden here, so we're not going to build an enclosure. I'm going to talk to you about a few of the most popular enclosures though. One is the simple fencing circle. You're going to use a 4-foot tall piece of fence, cut off a piece about 11 feet long, attach it in a circle. That's going to give you a circular cylinder about 3 to 4 feet wide, and that's going to be the ideal size to make that pile. Another one that you may have seen is 3 bins set up with pallets, used shipping pallets. This is so people will turn one bin into the next. Gives you a few different working areas. Like I said, they look nice, they're cute, they'll help keep your animals out. They're not necessary, and we're not going to touch on that today. At one point we were making compost in this big pit right here. On a very large scale, we would use our skid steer to come down in here, turn things over. Lots of different containers you can make your compost in. Today we're going to show you how to build one just right on the ground. So now we're ready to build our compost pile. I'm going to talk to you first about your siting and location. Ideally, you want to put your pile somewhere in the shade, somewhere where the summertime sun won't dry it out too much. This is a great location. It gets a little bit of morning sun. It's shaded most of the day. It's underneath these live oak trees. This is a prime location for our pile. Now you're going to want to make sure that the minimum size you build this pile is a cubic yard, 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet. That's the minimum size you're going to want to build this pile. That's how much material it's going to take to reach the type of temperatures that we want to reach. If you're worried about runoff from your pile, you would want to dig a little pit first. This will contain any runoff from that pile if you're worried about it going downhill into your neighbor's place or contaminating something. I've got some grapes here and a bed of garlic down here. I'm not worried about any type of runoff, so we're going to build this pile directly on the ground. First thing we're going to do is cover the 4x4 area with those small sticks that I showed you. That's going to give us a little bedding, provide some good aeration on the bottom of that pile. So now we've got our little layer of bedding here. This is our woody carbonous material. It's going to provide aeration for our pile and a little bit of drainage. Now we're going to add our first layer of brown material on top of that. This is our first layer of leaves, our carbon. We're going to try to add about a 4-inch layer to this as our very first layer. Now remember, we're trying to build this 3 feet tall, 3 feet wide, 3 feet wide. A cubic yard is going to be the minimum size that we want to build this. So that looks like a good first layer. Now we're going to add our first layer of nitrogen to this material. Remember, because I said that this grass is 20 to 1 and the leaves are 60 to 1, we're going to want to add a little bit more grass than we did leaves. So now we've got our first layer of carbon and nitrogen. What we're going to do is add moisture to this pile. That's going to help it break down. As we build these layers, we're going to want to wet them down with some water to make sure that this whole pile is wet all the way through. And now we're going to add our next layer of leaves and then more grass. Now I'm going to wet this layer down as well. So now we're going to add another layer of nitrogen and just keep building this pile. You don't have to build in layers. This pile will decompose if it's all mixed up. And after our first turning, it's all going to be mixed up anyways. But building in layers makes it easier to measure the amounts as you build your pile. My 4 inches of carbon, my 5 to 6 inches of grass, just makes it a little simpler to try to make sure your ratios of carbon and nitrogen are being a little more accurate. So when you're building your pile, if you have access to some compost, it's important to add a little bit to your pile. You can also just use regular soil out of your garden. But it's important to put a couple of layers in here of compost. It'll help jumpstart the activity and get the microbes growing in there. So we're going to add about a 1-inch layer right here in the center of our pile. And as we go higher up, we'll add another layer. This is some compost that came out of our pit that we showed you a little earlier. This is beautiful, beautiful compost. Look at this, all broken down. This is exactly what plants want to eat. It's full of microbes. Now I'm going to wet this down and then go back to our nitrogen carbon. So now at this stage our pile's about halfway built. We've added compost a couple of times to it. We're going to dig a little pit in the middle and I'm going to add those kitchen scraps that I mentioned earlier. And this has a couple of these biodegradable plastic bags in here. It'll be interesting to see how well these compost. So now we've got our kitchen waste in the pile. A nice nitrogen source right in the center of the pile. I'm going to add more leaves and we'll just continue building this pile up. So now we've got our pile built. It's about a square yard, 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet. We've moistened it down. We've added a couple layers of compost or soil in there to help jumpstart the activity in here. Now we're going to cap the whole pile with more carbon. We're going to cover the whole thing with leaves. We'll make sure that we can't see any of the nitrogen. There's a couple reasons you'd want to cover this. In the summertime, if this is uncovered, it's going to dry out too quickly. You're going to constantly need to be adding moisture to your pile. In the wintertime, you want to keep the rain off it. The exact opposite. You don't want it getting too soaked and saturated. You'll smell a real ammonia smell, meaning there's too much nitrogen in there and it's too wet while it's breaking down. So now we've got our whole pile nice and moist. We're going to cover it up with our carbon. I'm going to talk to you now about temperature. Ideally, you want your pile to reach thermophilic temperatures. These are between 140 and 160 degrees Fahrenheit. This is going to ensure that any weed seeds in there are destroyed during the breakdown process so that when you spread this on your beds, you're not going to get weeds popping up from your compost. This is a compost thermometer. You're going to stick this down into the center of your pile so you can monitor your temperatures. Most likely this pile is going to rise to about 110, maybe 140 during the next 24 hours. Most likely after our first turning in 2 or 3 days, you're going to see this pile reach thermophilic temperatures of about 140 to 160. Another way that you can measure the temperature of your compost pile if you don't have a thermometer is by sticking your hand into the center of that pile. If you can't hold it in there for more than 30 seconds, you're probably reaching those thermophilic temperatures, about 140, 160. If you can stick your hand in there, it's not hot, or you can leave it in longer than 30 seconds, your pile's not hot enough. I'm going to talk to you now about turning your pile. This is the key to aerating your pile and getting a lot of breakdown. For this 2-week compost, your first turning is going to happen in 2 days after building this pile. Your second turning is going to happen 2 days after that, and then all your turnings after that are going to be every 3 days. So in the first week, we're going to turn this pile 3 times. That's going to cause a lot of rapid breakdown and decay. If you go to turn, if your temperatures aren't rising, that means you don't have enough nitrogen in there. Add more greens, turn the pile, aerate the pile. That's going to help kickstart it, get some more heat going. If you've got an ammonia smell coming off your pile, that means you've got too many greens. You need to add more carbon. Add carbon, turn that pile some more. Those are the 2 main issues you're going to run into when building this, and it's either going to be add more carbon, add more nitrogen, turn that pile. That'll give you a new chance at getting things going correctly. So when you go to turn your compost pile, it's going to cool down initially. It's probably going to cool down around 100 degrees, 110 degrees, but it's going to rapidly regain that temperature up to 140, 160 over the next 24 hours. That's what you want to see. When you go to break up this pile to do your turning, you want to use a mattox. That's like a pickaxe with the wide head on one end. And you want to use it to rip through this pile. Try to chop it up a bunch. This comes back to what we were talking about mashing up the material, creating more surface area for the bacteria to break down to. We call it turning, but you're not really turning this pile. You're really mixing it up really good. We could have done that when we originally built the pile, but we built it in those layers so that we could measure it more accurately to make sure we had our carbon-nitrogen ratios correct. I want to talk about how you know your compost pile is done. You're going to know by monitoring that temperature. Once the temperatures drop to 110 degrees Fahrenheit, and they won't rise no matter how many times you flip that pile, that's when you know your compost is done. It's ready to be applied to your garden. This is some compost that came out of our big pit here. Look how beautiful this is. Look at the color. How dark black, how loose and aerated it is. There's no leaves in here at all. This was covered in oak leaves in the fall, and now it's just gorgeous. This can be applied directly to your garden now. You can use it as a top dress, you can make a tea out of it, you can mix it into the soil. This is what's going to give you healthy garden, healthy vegetables, thriving soils, attract worms, all other kinds of critters that you want in there. Well, thanks for joining us today. We taught you how to make your own compost using leaves and grass clippings, materials you can find in your neighborhood that most people are paying to have disposed of. I want to thank our crew here. I want to thank our Hawaii family at the Dragon Heart Farm. I want to thank all of you for tuning in, and I want to ask you to just hang in there. We'll all make it through this pandemic, and if you can get out in your yard and work on your garden a little bit, make some compost, grow some food, it's going to be very therapeutic for you. Help us all get through this. So thanks again. We'll catch you next time.